right, well, maybe we can generate a little bit of big data here as we go. So I'll give you a couple of opportunities to do that. I went ahead and put a Twitter hashtag out for the event here, just BCA SFO, if anybody wants to tweet. So I'm JP Bewley, I'm the CEO of Big Cloud Analytics, and have been in this space for actually my entire career. Might suggest that we were big data before big data was cool. So worked at Axiom prior to founding Big Cloud Analytics, where we did strategy and analytics on about 400 of the 500 largest marketing ecosystems in the world. And at that time, big data was structured data. Really, really big structured data. Hundreds of millions of records of consumer data with 1,600 rows. And then obviously now we have much more semi-structured, unstructured data coming into the equation. And what I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about is kind of the intersection of how you tell this story into the boardroom to get funding for your initiatives. So kind of how do you put big data to work and make it pay for your organization will be the theme of our discussion today. BCA, Big Cloud Analytics, is an Atlanta-based data sciences company. We focus on real-time predictions for marketers, both in the B2C and B2C space, B2B and B2C. We specifically do social, customer, and employee engagement. Fundamentally, we talked about kind of natural language questions of big data and answering those for business users. We answer things like, who are my best customers tomorrow? So looking into the future and projecting the profitability, the potential profitability of a customer over the next 12 to 24 months. What are they likely to buy next? When are they going to buy it? Do they like specific brands better than the other? Are they price sensitive? Are they about to leave? We do that on the back of 23 years of the best math, I would argue, in the consumer engagement analytics space. So our chief scientist, Dr. V. Kumar, is actually the most published marketing scientist in the world. And we're a Google Research Award winner. One of the case studies that I will talk you through today about making big data pay is actually from the Google Research Award that we won, as well as we have 6 Harvard Business Review articles in this space around predicting customer value, customer engagement. So the other opportunity I was going to give you here to generate a little bit of big data is if you'll text the word analytics to the short code 22828. At the end of the presentation here today, I'm going to give away a copy of our chief scientist's latest book. And if I can't get you to generate enough big data, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you some questions, and the best answers will give the book to the person with the best answers overall. So 22828, word analytics. We will give away the book here at the end. That, and by the way, the 3 case studies I'm going to cover will be in the book as well if you want some more information about it. So maybe don't need to spend a lot of time on the top half of this slide because there's been a lot of conversation in the general tracks through the course of the morning about big data. And this presentation, again, aimed at the C-suite, is really kind of building from the ground up, and we'll start very, very high level and kind of work our way deeper into the carpet as we go. But it's about large data sets that are hard to work with. They're hard to analyze, they're hard to visualize. It's what Wikipedia would tell you. What Gartner will tell you is that it's the 3 V's, volume, variety, and velocity. And it was interesting, through the course of the morning, I noticed that there were a number of presenters that threw a 4th V on there. One of the V's I saw was virtualization, and veracity, I think, was another V that I saw thrown into the equation. Over the last 7 to 8 years, though, one of the areas that I and my team have spent a lot of time is how do you tell this big data story into the boardroom? And I would suggest to you that to do that, you really need to define big data really as specifically the data sets that are going to unlock big business value for your brand. I'm going to show you a couple of tools that we've used to tell that story along the way so that you can begin to paint this picture. And I would suggest to you that as you're thinking about the big data initiatives in your organization, kind of as we talked about where big data used to be large consumer data sets for marketers that were mostly structured in nature, don't throw those out just yet, because a lot of things that I'm going to talk to you about is how you combine structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data to build a business outcome around a particular problem. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that. So we'll come back to this theme a couple of times along the way of what is the big data that's going to unlock value for my brand and my organization overall. It was interesting in the last conversation that we just had about this notion of people wanting to get started, and there was some questions around, are you using Hadoop yet, and how are you gluing data together within your organizations? And what I would tell you is that working with 300 brands on 6 continents over the last decade, almost every organization that we walk into is in some level of data dysfunction. And many of these are the most sophisticated high-tech companies that you could imagine, where you come in and there's 17 versions of a customer master, or there's 23 versions of a customer master. So how in the world do you get started on a 360-degree view of the customer and to be able to build predictive analytics around consumer engagement when that's the playing field that you're starting with? It's sort of like me playing golf, and I'm going to drop the ball anywhere I can because there's no way that I'm going to hit one in the fairway. So from an analytics perspective, you've got to figure out how to do that. It's suggested that through the year 2015, 85% of the Fortune 500 are still going to be in this massive state of data dysfunction, as opposed to the left-hand side of the slide of this rocket ship, rocket science promise of big data. It truly is big data. I mean, we're generating 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every 2 days. It's more now than the entire recorded human history before 2012. And so, you know, where do you start? Where am I at on this spectrum? Where am I at from a maturity perspective? And just over the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've had conversations with companies that were in that 17 customer master data set. And then we've had companies that were on the other side of the equation where they said, you know what, we've got real-time predictive models in place, we're refreshing the models every 24 hours, now we're looking to take it to the next level. Which methods and metrics should we look at and should we do? A couple of things that I'll throw out to you that got spoke about in the last presentation just a little bit is this whole notion of data decay and model decay. So your data sets within your organization are decaying at about 5% per month in their accuracy, and especially in the B2C space, right? But the models are also decaying as well. So how do you refresh those models and fine-tune them over a period of time so that they can remain with a high degree of efficacy and predictiveness? Every organization that we have worked with and have seen successfully implement these types of initiatives and drive big value for their business, starting from this area of data dysfunction, had to figure out specifically how do they do this as a journey, right? So how do they become rock stars overall within their organization for driving big business value, and design a process that they can bite off a piece of the apple, show some return, take a next bigger footing, and then move to a broader scale application. And so the rest of this presentation is going to be about how to carve up that journey within your organization. And just as with any good journey, you have to commit to a longer-term roadmap here, and don't stop believing. That'll be all the bad humor for today, by the way. That concludes the bad humor portion of the presentation. Stages of the big data and analytics journey. Very, very simplified view I would suggest to you is that it fits into 3 big phases. Pre-analytics, insight, and actualization. Pre-analytics was talked about in the last presentation that it could represent up to 85% of the work, and that's the data preparation, data cleansing, getting the data into a single spot. And I would suggest to you that that has been true, but more and more, rather than doing master data management initiatives where you're physically moving all of this data into a central spot, we're seeing more and more organizations glue these data sets together logically using some sort of referential or knowledge-based matching to glue various data sets together. And that might be something we want to poke at during the Q&A, is this notion of referential knowledge-based matching. But pre-analytics is really all about preparation. And I would suggest to you that preparation actually starts a level before you're even thinking about data. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. But it's about kind of the picture and the roadmap of where you're going on that journey and figuring that out in your destination before you start. Insight then is where you're getting in, you've got the data assembled, and you're actually starting to do and test some of those hypotheses. Putting analytics to work, putting predictive models to work, seeing how the results are, and beginning to set up the process of recursive learning within your organization. And then where you start to see the big money and the big return then is when you move that to actualization. You begin to start large-scale deployments overall. Some of the steps that fit within each of these: in the pre-analytics phase, where we're preparing, this envisioning phase, starting from the beginning and defining the business outcomes that you're looking for, and understanding what types of data sets are going to support that overall strategy and business outcome. And then an assessment of the data that you have in your organization. Do you have all the data you need? Are some of the main causal factors in your ability to predict going to be exogenous to your organization? And then obviously data collection, whether that be physical data collection or whether it be some sort of virtual data collection like referential matching based on a knowledge base. And then insight, description, and codification. Now this one is interesting, especially in the unstructured data space, because there are a variety of tools that are emerging for automatic classification and taxonomy of unstructured data. How do you join that with your structured world or your semi-structured world that you've been dealing with in the past? This is particularly relevant in credit card, financial services, insurance. And then actualization, from our point of view, this is really about customer engagement. Right? How do you begin to touch those customers in a variety of different channels in a predictive way that improves their experience with your brand, improves their bottom line and your bottom line as a result, and then recursive learning on the backside, measure and refine. And this notion of machine learning has been talked about today. Genetic hasn't come up that much, but basically how do you evolve this over a period of time based off the signals that you're getting in the marketplace. Now to start to get to the essence of what we're going to talk about today here, where do you start to see return out of these different stages of the journey? And here's what I would say to you is a very good heuristic of what we've seen traditionally at each one of these phases. In pre-analytics, it's mostly an investment to prepare you for later stages of the journey. But what I would suggest to you is go into it with the mindset and the goal that you're going to find enough low-hanging fruit that you're going to fund your efforts in pre-analytics. And we see these pre-analytics phases typically run somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks in total to lay out the business outcome that you're looking for, assess the data, start to get it collected and get yourself prepared for analytics. A lot of times, the ROI for the pre-analytics initiative comes from shutting something off, because you find something in your discovery process that has operational cost to it in people, process, and technology that you can just turn off and fund the pre-analytics initiative itself. And that, I've seen that over and over again for organizations where there were literally rogue data stores sitting out there or skunkworks and R&D efforts that didn't fit into the larger overall scenario, and that money could be redirected to fund later stages of the journey. In the insight phase, in most cases you're taking analytics here and you're doing some level of in-place data scoring, and you're going to put it to work for a specific use case, a specific outcome. And what we typically see in the area of predictive marketing analytics is this has about an 8 to 10x ROI and that will be in line with the case studies that I'll show you here a little bit later. Where you start to get the big scale ROI, obviously, is when you roll that out in a broader, more automated fashion. A lot of organizations right now are stopping this step in the journey. But with cloud and more elastic computing capabilities, we're seeing more and more applications in this insight phase. So now I'll take you forward and I'll show you a couple of examples from this first step of the journey, which is the envisioning aspect. This is going to be for a high fashion retailer, and effectively it's using the data to tease out the way that customers move through their categories of products. In what order do they buy? And that obviously starts to set up notions for markup chains and things like that, which you can then start to predict into the future what they're likely to buy next. A very simplified example, but for this particular high fashion retailer, customer value on the y-axis, the length of the relationship or tenure on the x-axis, the way that customers move through the products and services in general for a particular persona was that they would start the primary product relationship with something like a rugby. They would move to a secondary product relationship 23 days later with a pair of jeans, and the tertiary product relationship were in things like shoes, boots, belts, and things like that. And so the question becomes then, how many customers do I have like this? Are they my most valuable customers? What are they likely to buy next? And how can I go find more customers like them? So the data sets that this high fashion retailer needs to answer those types of questions start to paint themselves in this data use grid. And again, very simplified view. This is not your cloud diagrams, your IT schematics. Remember, this is about funding and selling this in to the CEO, the CFO, and the board. But this is effectively a very simplified view of the data that's required to support that business case that we just talked about. So in this instance, you have 4 different data types. You have structured data that's coming from point-of-sale transactions. You have structured data that's coming from e-commerce transactions. You have structured and unstructured data coming from product return interactions. And you have social media, which is obviously unstructured streams. Now, in this particular instance, if we're just going to predict what this customer is likely to do next off of the first 2 data sets here, which you can do with some degree of accuracy, one of the big problems that you have here is that these data sets tend to be very chunky in nature. They're not very granular, and so you're not predicting the future off of a lot of different data points. And so the point-of-sale transactions happen fairly infrequently. We just, as consumers, we just don't go to that particular retail store that often. It's once a quarter, maybe once a month for high-value shoppers that are returning pretty frequently. Tends to happen more frequently in e-commerce, but it's still, at best, you're talking about a purchase time that's measured in months in most cases. And so it's a pretty chunky granular data, a pretty chunky data set. To give you an analogous example, the U.S. population replaces their car about every 5 to 7 years on average. Did you know that when you come in market to buy a new car, you move from awareness to consideration to test driving to purchase in a 6-week time frame? So now I'm General Motors sitting here, or I'm Ford or Toyota sitting here, and I've been trying to predict when you're going to buy that new car, because for 5 to 7 years, and you're going to come in market and you're going to buy it very, very quickly. So if I'm just predicting off of the car transactions, there's not enough data there for me to be accurate about in-market timing. And that's where some of these other data points start to come in. Product returns, hopefully, are much less frequent than your purchase transaction data, but your social media streams are very, very granular in nature. But there's some very interesting contextual data that's happening here as well. So if you remember from this last slide, I've got a typical customer relationship for this particular male persona in this age, income, net worth demographic that looks like rugbies, jeans, boots, and belts. So what happens next? Well, to figure out what happens next, I look at those patterns across my data sets for my point-of-sale transactions and my e-commerce transactions. But there's a product return transaction that's happening in here as well, and there's some contextual notes that got captured in that product return interaction. These boots are in this case, too small, right? So you start to get some information about the right size of boot for that customer, but also their willingness to engage you and return a product back to the brand or the store in this case. And also some contextual notes that got captured about, I really like this year's, and in this case, it's the tweed style hunting jacket, right? And so we start to see an indication that customers that have purchased before of this particular persona have bought rugbies, jeans, boots, belt, and typically have about a 30% likelihood that they're going to buy the tweed hunting jacket. And now I have a pretty interesting trigger that has just happened right there in the product return interaction that is bolstered by some mentions happening in Facebook and Twitter conversations. And I have about an 88% likelihood of predicting that that customer is now in market for that tweed hunting jacket. And so this became the complete data picture for predicting next logical product for this high fashion retailer. Again, in a very simplified storytelling fashion for the board of directors. So Hadoop, the elastic cloud infrastructure, SaaS, R, all these systems take quite a bit of investment within your organizations. And so how do you go find that money, right? How do you go find that money? How do you convince your CFO, your CEO, your board of directors that it's actually worth investing in and going and get this journey? Everyone now is generally starting to believe in the promise of big data. However, translating that into more quantifiable terms is a little bit more challenging to do. And so we'll now transition to a framework of where to go find it. And this has shifted over the years. As we went into the Great Recession, the business cases and the way that they were shaped for the board were very, very different leading up to the Great Recession. And coming out, there's a little bit of a blend, but typically funding for these types of initiatives has been sold successfully based on 3 key categories. And those 3 categories are simply blue, green, and orange here. Incremental revenues, people, process, technology, cost investment, or savings. And by the way, your hardware, software, R, SaaS, SPSS, those types of investments would fit into this green box. And so they're a subtraction out of your business case in this series of cash flows. And media spend or sales costs that it takes you to actually go claim the incremental revenues in the blue category. Those 3 combined give you the economic value proposition for your big data initiative. Digging into that next level, what are the levers of improvement? What are the key business outcomes that I need to enable through big data to be able to drive a cash flow in each of these areas? And they tend to be things like this. How can I use big data and analytics to drive additional touch points to consumers? So how can I learn about consumers from my data streams and reach them in new places? And this can be principally used for new customer acquisition more successfully than anything. How can I increase the engagement factor with that consumer at the touch points that I already have with them? How can I make my website interaction and experience much more relevant with them? How can I anticipate what their needs are and make a recommendation to them? How can I use data to expand my marketable universe? And something that was talked about right at the end of the last conversation, how can I affect response and conversion rates to ongoing, long-standing campaigns? So those are key areas to look for how data is going to support that part of your business case. In this area here, levers of improvement are things like changes to policies. I'll show you one very successful case study where learning about product returns funded an entire data initiative within an organization. Consolidation, co-location, virtualization, right? Shutting off some of those 17 customer masters and beginning to move them into the cloud, as well as standardization. And the last one here, maybe a little bit controversial, but severance expense. We've seen a number of organizations over the last several years that were rebadging IT staff to third-party vendors, meaning I'm going to move them off of our payroll and I'm going to move them to a third-party vendor, and I'm going to outsource the infrastructure for this. We've even seen organizations say, you know what, we're going to outsource the PhD aspect of this, because we just can't acquire and retain and train the PhD talent to our organizations fast enough. And so we're going to reach to third-party organizations for the data science and analytics component of this. That's very philosophical for a business. Some are choosing that that's going to be a source of their competitive advantage and they want to internalize that. But we have seen increasingly a number of organizations that are pushing that now to third parties. In this last area, I mean, this deals from everything from better optimization in online ad tech to better use of email campaigns to traditional above-the-line advertising. In one particular instance, it was a Western European cell phone manufacturer. They're spending about 600 million euro a year in above-the-line media spend, meaning that was brand advertising that they were spending. 3% improvement on the effectiveness of that investment. 18 million euro was used to fund their entire big data and analytics infrastructure. And so it was about an optimization play in that instance. Can I take existing dollars that I'm already spending over here in the marketing budget and apply those to IT to fund that initiative? Now digging into the case study specifically here. This first one was the one that I mentioned at the beginning. This is for the particular case study that we won the Google Research Award for. And this is more the traditional definition of big data, which is strictly social media, user-generated content. In this particular instance, it was for an ice cream retailer. The focus, as I mentioned, was in social media, and it was unstructured data only that got reduced down to a structured data set, and analytics performed on that. We monitored 825,000 conversations that were taking place on Twitter and Facebook across 1,736 different individuals. So that seems like a pretty focused data set for social media, right? And it's in a pretty specific region within a country. Out of that, there were 1,000 influencers that were identified that had greater than a 20% connectivity to the surrounding social media communities around them, and those were deemed influencers. And then there was a specific business strategy that was invoked around that learning from the social media data stream. And that was, how can I reward and incent through marketing campaigns and offers this particular community to take an action? And if I can get them to take this action, what is going to happen? And the result of what happened, it was basically a Share Your Brownies campaign, which basically encouraged them to talk about more every time they visit this particular retailer and pass along a word-of-mouth advertising strategy. 40% increase in brand awareness for this particular ice cream retailer, 40% increase in revenue growth overall, and an 83% ROI for this big data and analytics initiative. And this was a pretty complex set of analytics, and one thing I should call out here is that this is 7 figures worth of big data and analytics, and so 83% ROI was not insignificant at all. I mean, this was a very significant initiative to drive value from social media conversations. What I'll tell you, out of the 3 case studies that I'm showing you, this is the most complex, doing it just off of unstructured social media data. The others that I'm going to show you are combining traditional structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data, and you'll see that they drive much simpler and much larger returns. And so as you're thinking about big data and analytics within your organization, don't throw out your traditional data stores in favor of telemetric data, Facebook conversations, all the social graph data. It's the combination of those data sets with your existing data sets that we've seen drive the most value overall.
Before you go, can I just ask, what's the time frame? How long did you monitor?
In total, I think this was 19 days?
19 months.
19 months from beginning to end of the project.
Where they built they structured it, they tested it, and they deployed it.
Thank you.
This is the high fashion retailer. In addition to predicting next logical product, which by the way, the outcome of this for a next logical product perspective was 88% accuracy. So a very high degree of accuracy around predicting what that customer was going to do next. But one of the key outcomes of this was actually in the green category of the business case. So the last one we talked about was in the incremental revenues category. This one was a significant operational savings in the people, process, and technology cost within this organization. The key learning here was around product returns and a change to the product return policy. In this instance, across these types of data streams, we looked at gift purchases, holiday purchases, new categories, and shopping in new channels. We found that there was an optimal level of product returns that translated into high customer value. Effectively, it was a saddle point setting there for customer returns. And interestingly enough, 13% was the optimal level of product returns. And so just to give you a little bit of kind of broader context on that, because it may seem somewhat counterintuitive, I'm trying to sell people things. Why is them returning products and services to me of value, and why is that an important data set overall? I'm sure everybody in the room has had somebody let them down at some point along the way, right? And so you can probably very specifically remember an instance of that. Now, 2 questions, or 1 question, 2 outcomes. In some instances, those people recovered from that and they made it up to you, right? And in some instances, they didn't make it up to you. How do you remember and how do you feel about the people that made it up to you? Stronger sense of loyalty, stronger sense of engagement, because they cared enough to do something about it, to take ownership, to make it right. It's the same relationship we as consumers expect of the retailers and the brands that we work with. And so the level of product returns that a consumer has with an organization is actually highly predictive of the value of that customer in the future. It's one of the key indicators of customer value on a forward-going basis. And so that has become a very, very important data set for many of the retailers that we work with, this level of product returns. But there is a saddle point to that data set. And so for every percentage point minor changes, tune in the dial to the returns policy to try to find that optimal point. For every percentage point increase, let's loosen standards and let's make it easier to do returns. And so now my product returns goes from 13% up to 14%. Significant decrease in profit, $63,000 decrease in profit. Let's fine tune it the other way. Let's tighten it so it's harder to return products. And so I begin to step down product returns at 1% increments, and I get to 12%, and I see an increase in profits of only $20,000. And so that became a very interesting learning as well about what type of data point do I want to optimize around. And so this is an instance then where the big data learning had to be affected through the business policy. And the business policy around product returns had to be structured in a way that targeted that optimal level of returns and then fine-tuned over time. Most all of these big data and analytics initiatives have some level of unintended consequence or unintended learning. The unintended consequence or unintended learning in this particular initiative was that we didn't know this going in, this brand didn't know this going in, but customers were much less likely to return products that they bought on sale. Maybe it's just because we have this stigma in the back of our minds that all sales are final. Not really sure the true causality of that, but this data point in particular holds true for this across all the data sets that we've looked at for this particular brand, is that they're much less likely to return on sale. Yep.
So you mentioned about product returns. I'm wondering, do you do anything to that customer in order to make them happy, or is it just one of the variable you could predict what they will access in the future?
Yeah, so I'll talk in a broader context now about a way a lot of different companies use those types of interactions. So, first and foremost, what the data will tell you is focus on solving the problem first, right? So recover from the service failure first. And doing that in the shortest amount of time possible is key. However, if you successfully resolve that problem for them and can do that with a high degree of satisfaction, guess when the best time to recommend next logical product to them is? Right then, immediately following the service recovery. Amazingly, that is the best time to sell them something more. Your level of loyalty and trust with that particular customer is the highest it's going to be for a while, and every day after that loyalty and trust will start to decay. And so specifically, we see this used in a variety of different ways. The last case study I'll show you actually kind of highlights this a bit, is customer calls in with a service problem. One of the first questions that you need to be able to answer is this a valuable customer to me? Is this somebody that I want to save? And by the way, you don't want to save every customer. You just flat out do not want to save every customer. And many of the conventional wisdoms that come from the old data sets, specifically in retail used to be all about recency, frequency, monetary metrics, and that was what determined whether it was a good customer or not. But what we're seeing increasingly as you bring more and more data into the equation is cross-buying, more frequent buying doesn't necessarily always drive higher profit customers. What you may have in that data set are a lot of bargain shoppers, a lot of people that return products often, and so again, you don't always want to save every customer. So the first thing that we see a lot of companies do is immediately at the point where they're about to try to do some level of service recovery, is it a valuable customer? To what degree am I going to do or go to save this customer? How much am I willing to invest to save this customer? And to do that, you have to be able to answer the question, this customer is going to be worth $1,500 to me over the next 12 months. Therefore, I am willing to invest $83 today to save them. So those types of metrics we're seeing be pretty important. Then after that, then, did I resolve the problem quickly? Did I resolve the problem with a high degree of satisfaction? What am I going to say next? So that's the way we see people shaping customer engagement. Does that help?
Also a side question, you mentioned about social media monitoring. So how did you map what they're saying on Facebook or Twitter to the email address that you're tracking for transactions?
So the customer master and things like that. A couple different approaches you can do. One is you can key off email address and use exogenous data sources to bring over customer identity. So that's one way. Cookie syncing is another way to do it. You can't get 100% match on the social media conversations with your known customer base. We've seen typically in the range of 30 to 40% coverage of the the unstructured conversations that are going on in the social graph, and the ability to match that back to a known universe. And that is increasing slowly over time. I mean, 2 years ago, to get a 3 to 5% hit rate on social media conversations to a known customer base was fantastic. So it's increased pretty substantially over the last 2 years, but it's still not a 100% hit rate. So,
can you expand a little bit on exogenous
exogenous data?
Thank you.
Yep.
Matching specifically with customer.
Yeah, so, and this will get a little bit into that referential knowledge-based matching conversation. So, you know, I have to kind of self-disclose here around, you know, it's like the disclaimer of, I'm going to recommend you invest in this fund, but I also own it. So, I spent 5 years at Axiom, the largest consumer database company in the world, where we're trying to sell you all of this exogenous data, right? So here's the dirty little secret in this predictive equation for marketing predictions around best customer, next best action, things like that. 77% of the predictive equation for what a customer is going to be worth, what they're going to do next, and when they're going to do it comes from your first-party transaction data alone, within your 4 walls, right? So exogenous data from a second-party data source like Axiom or any of their competitors gets you about another 5 to 10% predictive power in the overall equation. Social media and behavioral intent data gets you the last mile, so to speak. And the problem that you run into there is that there are so many data sources now. How do you make sense of which ones you're going to append and prioritize and are going to drive value for your business? And again, what I suggest over and over to organizations is make the most out of what you have within your own 4 walls today, because the majority of companies that we come and engage with are not making the most out of their first-party transaction data. They're not pulling out the patterns. They're not using those patterns to predict the future. And they don't know at this point the right questions to go ask to buy exogenous data. Now, the difference, or the one caveat that I would offer to you in that regard is in the notion of next best customer, right? So I've got who are my best customers, and I've created this decile structure around that, and I know that this particular set of customers is the ones that I want to go after. And based off their behavioral ladders that they've went through in my database, when I look at them longitudinally, I can start to predict with a high degree of accuracy what they're going to do next. But when it comes to the category of how do I go find more like them, you have to do some level of lookalike analysis, and that's where exogenous data becomes really important. And so that's an instance where you tease out your behavioral personas, you append that to demographic, psychographic personas, and you make them more rich in nature, and you put a face on that consumer. And then you say, now show me all the other people in the US population that look like that. And that could be for direct mail targeting, it could be for targeted banner online, but you have to answer those first couple of questions before you get to the third question. Then also what I would suggest to you, so we talked about, you know, are you physically bringing the data together? Are you logically bringing the data together? Are you using some sort of referential knowledge base? So there are referential knowledge base matching technologies. Axiom is one of the providers in this space, to bring those data sets together and to be able to recognize with a very high degree of accuracy that Tom is the exact same Tom that lived in an apartment in Seattle 7 years ago and went to this graduate school. And even though his name's misspelled in these 2 different databases, 98% accuracy, it's the same Tom. And oh, by the way, this email address that I just got through this survey form over here, that also matches up to Tom. And so that's one of the ways that you can quickly glue together these 17 disparate customer masters into one logical data set that you could do predictive analytics on top of. Now, the other thing that the last thing I'll say on exogenous data there is one of the other areas that could be very, very interesting is less about the predictions and more about the triggers, right? So do your predictions off of your first-party data sets and combing through the behavioral data that you have within your own 4 walls today. But when you need a key trigger event, so for example, another dark, deep secret in my past was in the whole space of consumer moving. And when someone moves, they spend $10,000 to $50,000 in a 6-month time frame surrounding a move across a whole variety of products and services and categories. So if I'm a marketer, I always do that. If I'm a marketer, I want that trigger that somebody's about to move. And preferably, I want to do it before they're actually picking up and landing in the new house. That's an exogenous data set that gives you a very key trigger of when to go do something. You already know what to do because you have in your database today customers who've moved in the past, and you see address changes and things like that. So you know what they're going to go buy from your company and your products and services. What you need now is the trigger of when to engage with them. So that's a more of a third-party data set that can be used in a trigger-based scenario that becomes highly predictive of in-market timing. We should move along just about right on time. So the last is the orange category. We've talked kind of at this one a little bit, so I won't spend as much time on this one unless there's a lot of specific questions. 4 data sets here. Structured data set, which is the monthly contractual relationship that I have with this consumer. This is for broadband internet, so it's in the telecom category. I have a structured data set, which are video on demand engagements with a particular consumer, and they're watching the Lost series on video on demand, 21 Jump Street, Boston Legal, and so they're clearly one of these people that wants to watch an entire season over a couple of day period. So they have that behavior that's exhibited in their video on demand data. And then I have my customer support data, as we talked about in the high fashion retail example. It's both structured and unstructured, so there's it's not that frequent, but there's some very rich contextual data in there. And this is the instance where someone calls in and they're about to leave, right? They're upset with their service, and you need to make a split-second decision, do I save them or not? And that's what this specific set of analytics was focused on, is how do I save them? And if I save you, what do I offer you next to increase revenue and profits, but more importantly, increase loyalty and tenure, which is going to give me a higher lifetime value. And in this case, we monitored longitudinal transaction data, renewal rates, customer care calls, leveraged data to pick right product at right time to consumer. So it's a high-value customer, they're worth saving. What are they likely to, I've saved them, what are they likely to buy next? Pitch right product, 88% accuracy on right product. At that point, the customer, I'm going to skip over it if I don't watch it. Revenue for this particular initiative increased by 2.5 times, or to $1,700 per customer. Profits increased, interestingly enough, because we didn't save all customers. And we weren't ubiquitously invested in saving all customers. Therefore, profit increased at a much faster rate. So profit increased 4 times, or to $2,600, almost $2,700. Marketing costs decreased over the customer tenure because what happened? Right? I knew very specifically who my best customers were. So where did I focus my marketing efforts? Just on getting customers that looked like those new customers. And then the last one, which I almost got excited and jumped ahead about, is we've recovered from a service failure. We've demonstrated as a brand that we care and we're going to fix it for the customers that matter. And then immediately on the heels of that, we're going to offer you something that's highly relevant to you to deepen your engagement with the organization overall. So it's that notion of I'm going to follow right on the heels of the service recovery. I'm going to offer you next best product. And as a result of that, I'm going to increase my loyalty and tenure with you. Customer satisfaction increased 63%. Now keep in mind, this is a population, a cohort of consumers that I have failed. But I have recovered for the ones that matter. And I have suggested, and now I'm selling you something, right? I'm not just focused on solving your problem. I want to sell you something after I recover from your problem. And even they were calling in for a failure, we recovered, and then we sold you something new. Their satisfaction with the organization went up by 63%. It seems counterintuitive, but that's fundamentally the way that it works out. And it's just ingrained in behavioral economics with consumers. So in conclusion here, bringing us in for a landing, majority of organizations that we engage with not making the money that they have today within their 4 walls. And so that speaks very specifically to your question about when do I go get exogenous data. And I would say you can build your business cases alone with nobody else's data but your own in the majority of cases. Prioritize the data and how it's going to support your overall business outcome. And that means you need to understand what that business outcome looks like from the beginning. So that life cycle that we mapped out in that one example for the high fashion retailer. And then we underpin that with a data use grid. And we said to support this particular business strategy, what types of data do I have to have? And what types of returns am I expecting to go get from that? And this is where it becomes key, and this is the key pivotal point of whether you're successful in convincing your organization to invest in these types of initiatives or not, is, hey, if you allow me to do this step, I'm going to find you $500,000 of incremental new revenue. I'm going to save you $3 million worth of operational cost and product returns. I'm going to help you save $5 million in media spend out of that marketing category. And so again, there's other buckets, but these are the three big buckets that most of these initiatives are funded off of. Incremental revenues, people, process, and technology costs, and media spend. And then we've hit through the course of the presentation today. But done right, these types of initiatives can drive big business outcomes for organizations. So if we can get our technology to work here, see what the survey says. Oh, one literally just came in as I'm pulling it up here. I'm going to let it drop off the screen here before I get to it. Talk amongst yourselves. And answer is, all right, I'm not going to call out your entire email address. I'll call it Grossnickle.
Can't pronounce Grossnickle.
Grossnickle. Well, I was just going to spell it. There you go. Thank you. All right, and with that, here's my contact information if you need it. I will not be here all night, I think as the previous speaker said. And so with that, any questions that you have or comments or discussion, we're right about on the time that we're supposed to be. Questions? We covered some along the way, but. All right, going once, going twice, no sale. Thank you very much for your time.